And they did a complete research or retesting on those documents that Monsanto had supplied to our government, and they gave a report back to the Health Ministry of Japan. And they had said, after they redid all the experiments, they said to the Ministry of Health in Japan, and said all the documentation supplied to the Canadian government by Monsanto was falsified and fraudulent. And that was the report to the Health Ministry of Japan, and yet that was supplied to the Department of Agriculture, which is over the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in Ottawa. I submitted that when I got back from Japan to the government 2 years ago. I still have not heard anything about it. I've written a number of letters. It's total silence. But they do have that report. It's condensed into 4 or 5 pages from 400, but still they gave that it's fraudulent and falsified. So that's another issue. I think I have covered some of the main issues. It was not easy for my wife and myself to stand up to Monsanto. And that's another issue I would like to touch upon, and what they are doing to farmers throughout North America. They would watch us all day long when we worked in our fields, or they would watch when my neighbors helped me. They would watch. They would sit on the road along our farms. They would come into our driveway and sit for hours at a time and watch what my wife would be doing. They didn't do anything but just for intimidation and harassment. She would receive phone calls. You better watch it. They're going to get you. Then they would go to our neighbors and say, if you support Percy and Louise Schmeiser, we're going to come after you, and you won't have a farm left. And you can imagine how embarrassing it was when we'd go be at home, or we'd go to a party or socialize or something. They were scared. Our neighbors were scared to talk to us. They would look this way and that way to see if anybody was watching them, because of the fear what Monsanto had said to them. And I think the worst thing was when Louise and I were in South Africa. I was speaking at Parliament in Cape Town, and Monsanto's representative was there from Johannesburg, and he demanded that he could at least speak for 5 minutes, and he said to the South African Congress and Parliament, he said to the Minister of Agriculture, there is no such thing as cross-pollination, there is no such thing as seeds blown in the wind, and he got laughed at in Parliament. And coming out of the assembly, my wife and I ran face to face into him. His name was Wally Green, and I'll never forget that. And he shook his fist in my wife's face and my face and said, nobody stands up to Monsanto. We're going to get both of you somehow, someday, and we'll destroy you both. So you can imagine the fear that we have lived in all those years. So, and it's not only us. There's hundreds of other farmers that have gone through the same thing, but we were fortunate enough to be able to stand up to Monsanto with the help of people from all over the world. Many times, believe me, when I came home from different speaking tours around the world, and I come home and I think, my God, what am I doing to my wife? What am I doing to my family? What am I doing to my friends to put them under that stress? My wife was suffering from breast cancer. She had high blood pressure and thought, I should just quit doing this. And she always gave me that encouragement. Stand up for the rights of farmers. Don't give up. And at least we have a chance to do something. And with her help, we did stand up to Monsanto. So those are some of the issues that arise when you introduce GMOs. I've touched on most of them, but I think an important one now is the health issue. And for the first time, back in June of this year, there's finally a report out from one of the medical associations of the United States, and they give some of the reasons that other countries have said for many, many years, and the effects of eating GMOs, and the issue of high mortality rates, fertility rates, and that is a big concern. So those are some of the other issues that arise, and the food issue now and the health issue has become very important. I'd like to say a little bit about that. Monsanto used to say that there was no horizontal transfer of GMOs in the body, and that it would pass through a body if you ate GMO food. And that is totally, totally false. GMOs will, to some degree, will also pass through your stomach lining, but especially in your intestines, into your bloodstream and into your body. And the same thing goes for an animal, and they're still saying that in Europe. So if you eat even an animal that has been fed GMOs, when you eat the meat from that animal, you are eating GMOs. There is no such thing as horizontal transfer. It will go into your body. So I think that's an important issue. The other important issue I'd like to talk about on health is that a lot of times, and many of you will know this, that when you transfer a gene from one life form to another, you can never do it by itself. You have to use a promoter or vector, and in many cases it's an agrobacteria, or it's a virus which comes from the cauliflower mosaic virus. But most importantly, canola, they have an antibiotic-resistant marker gene in it. And many farmers now on the prairies and people in small towns are totally immune to antibiotics because of breathing in the pollen flow from canola that has that antibiotic-resistant marker gene. The companies, Monsanto was told they have to stop using the antibiotic-resistant marker gene by 2009, which is this year. They could not find a new vector or a new promoter, so now they have been granted an extension to 2015, where they still can use the antibiotic-resistant marker gene. So these are some of the main issues. I think I could talk on the 2 hours on the environmental issue, but especially the issue of the superweeds. What is a superweed? And I'll finish with that. A superweed is a conventional canola plant that has taken the genes or the traits from 3 or 4 companies that were selling GMOs, and which now makes it a very difficult weed to control, or plant to control, because it is in our wheat fields, it's in our barley fields, it's in our towns, power corporation property, road allowance, and so on. So they have to use a new chemical, or more powerful chemical, to control it. There's 2 ways they can control it with powerful chemicals. One is Monsanto's own Roundup herbicide, which they have added new additives to it, and it's one Roundup now with the new additives in it is one of the most toxic chemicals, believe me, on the face of the earth. And you remember a few years back, Monsanto said the Roundup was so safe you could drink it. It was safer than table salt. Believe me, it's not anymore, if it was ever safe to drink it. And the other thing, they have a new ester out, 2,4-D ester, which now contains 70% Agent Orange, which we are now using on the prairies to control this new superweed. So you can imagine the danger that's doing to our environment and again to human health. In 1998, I think we stood up to Monsanto for some other reasons. We knew as seed developers that if you ever get down to one variety of a seed or plant, and you had some disease, some disaster, you have nothing to fall back on to develop new varieties. And the other thing was this too. My wife and I have 5 children. We have 15 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. And we thought, what kind of a legacy are we going to leave to our future generations? Because we were told many, many times by scientists that they don't know at this time if you ever can recall back out of the environment once you introduce a GMO. And what would you recall back? If you take canola and it has cross-pollinated to the other market garden crops. So we felt very strongly about that, the legacy that we would leave. And we thought we have a chance to do something about it. Each of you here tonight have a chance to do something about it, to demand something that is safe for our future generation, that not hung over their heads because of that point of no return.